Hey, this is Kevin Wallis, and in this week's Pacific edition of Forerunners, we'll discuss the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the impact that's had on surfing, and the best steps you can take to keep yourself and others safe. We'll also touch on some of the more interesting storms in the Pacific during the last week and some tips to help you become a better forecaster. And now, time for the shameless plug. If you're not already a premium member and like to give us a try, which we would greatly appreciate, go to surfline.com/Forerunners podcast for a free 15-day trial of Surfline Premium. Here we go.
Okay, this is Sean Collins, Chief Forecaster of Surfline, and this is, the first order of business, looking down on the Southern Hemisphere, what to expect in the next 2 weeks.
At any given moment, a perfect wave is breaking somewhere on this earth. For the surfer, the trick has always been knowing where and when to find it.
All right, starting our fourth Pacific podcast, and things continue to change and get kind of weirder and weirder. I am Director of Forecasting Kevin Wallis. I am joined as always, as always so far, hopefully continue as always over the next few weeks, by lead forecaster Schaller Perry. You can follow Schaller on Twitter and Instagram at @SPerrySurfline. I got that right this time on the first take.
Good job there.
You can. I'm also at K Wallis Surfline, and Wallis is Wallis. And if you're listening to this pod and you have a question, please send us a direct message. Hit us up on Twitter, on Instagram. We'd love to try and answer those questions. And whether that's an article, whether that's a future pod, we're starting to find ourselves, as we've made some shifts, Schaller, with the way we do forecasts due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're gonna shift, at least temporarily, into some different avenues, and hopefully teaching you guys a little bit about surfology, and just a more focus on that versus trying to put people in the best waves at the best spots at the best times, which is what we normally do, or we normally try to do, but it seems a little tone deaf to try and do that right now.
To parlay off that, obviously we're making some changes to what we're going to be covering in the podcast. Can you discuss, maybe give people an idea of what they might expect to see on our forecast products and our report products on the site now that we're making some shifts there as well?
Yeah, so just to let everyone know, earlier today we made the tough decision to suspend some of those forecast products. It's really the premium analysis is the big one. That's the long form written text that you can see. A couple things we pulled back on our daily surf reports. However, we're going to continue to issue that regional forecast, the 7-day colored boxes that you see, whether that's for South Orange County or Santa Cruz or the North Shore, or whatever, and then our AM and PM reports with surf heights and quality. And we're going to continue to do that, first and foremost, because it's really important for us to continue to log that data for a number of different reasons, but hopefully still find some people still find that of use, and if to do so safely and get out and serve. And just to be very clear, abundantly clear at the top of this, and this is the messaging that we sent out to all of our users yesterday, and it's really pretty clear on our site today. With regards to surfing, please check with your local authorities, and if allowed, very simple. If you can't get to the beach alone and surf alone, no standing next to your buddies in the parking lot, no chilling on the beach with a group of people, please don't go and surf. Stay 6 feet apart always, and that's much easier to do at certain breaks than others. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, at lower and upper trestles over the last few days didn't get that memo or are choosing to ignore it. Please do so. I think if you can abide by those rules, get to the beach on your own, surf on your own, stay away from people. I think it's an incredible release right now. I don't want to get too hippy-dippy, but surfing is one of the most spiritually cleansing things that we can do now, and I know most, if not all of us, could really use that. So,
it'd be great if we could expedite our way through this to an extent, get to the other side.
Yeah, it seems like the quicker we can do this, the more steadfast that we can be in our ability to isolate ourselves, to isolate, quarantine, stay away from people. Hopefully, the quicker this will end, obviously. And we know it's tough. I haven't been surfing for quite something. Been a couple of weeks now, and definitely there's been some fun waves in Southern California.
I miss surfing
probably some
right
more
now.
coming up. Yeah,
We had a couple of great Southern Hemisphere swells around here with good conditions. It's just, with the Grom home and everybody home, it's makes it a little more tricky to sneak out sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like you see everyone is posting about like, oh, everyone, you've got all this free time on your hands. What are you supposed to do? Those people obviously don't have kids or maybe don't have a job. It's just like, I'm like, man, free time. What is that between, fortunately we do still have work. We are, we're continuing to plow ahead as a company and we are employed. I feel very grateful to say that. And we have kids at home
fortunate.
too. So between those two things, there isn't a whole lot of free time right now, but I certainly wouldn't mind getting in the ocean for just a little bit. I will absolutely do my part to stay away from people. I'll go surf the crappiest wave in Southern California if I have to, if that means I'm by myself, as long as I get a little saltwater bath.
There's been some options too. It's been a little bit peaky. It hasn't been super walled or overly large or anything too. So you'd think you get out there and spread out a little bit more, but here we are. Hey, at least there's waves though.
Yeah. It's remind me, Schaller, I know you went to school at Florida State and obviously spent some time in Florida there. Did you grow up partially in Florida too? Did you have to go through kind of like hurricanes and tropical cyclones, things like that?
Yeah, born and raised in Florida. So I was there until I moved to California shortly after graduating from college. So yeah, definitely went through quite a few hurricane drills over the years.
And our East Coast forecasters, Kurt Corte, Mike Watson, and Rob Mitzcipher, I think it was just the podcast last week, were talking about comparing a hurricane somewhat to COVID-19, and just in the way like we're trying to communicate things as a company and as a forecast team, and it's something we're really acutely aware of. Around hurricanes, you can have incredible waves a lot of times on the East Coast, but you can also have incredible devastation. So we're trying to strike that right tone in the way we're communicating things, the way we are, the things that we are doing right now, we hope is the right course of action. But that's the reason I kind of asked about that was, the communication around hurricanes with surf is really a delicate one, and I think we're in some respects in the same ballpark.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talking with a couple of guys on the East Coast, I mean, just even with supplies at grocery stores and stuff, it's like the whole country's hurricane prepping right now, as opposed to just people in Florida, like the Eastern Seaboard.
Yeah, wild stuff. Well, there are a couple fun, kind of fun things we can talk about for surf right now. I don't think, again, we're not trying to drive anybody anywhere at this point. Please, if you can't surf by yourself, please do not go out and surf. But there's some cool things going on in the ocean right now. And just, I think we can talk about that on a high level without, being traffic cops and pushing people everywhere. But first and foremost in my mind is there's a pretty good Southern Hemisphere swell that's running in Hawaii right now. And that was from a former cyclone down off, basically down in the Coral Sea off the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast was really good. Gretel, like it was just I guess it was last week, right? Was the timing there?
Yeah, pumping surf for the Goldie. Just actually pretty amazing surf there for a number of days. And then that system went extra tropical. Just north to, I'd say, northeast of New Zealand as it was dropping south towards the central South Pacific. And yeah, it really had it did a great job of intensifying and really growing in size as it went extra tropical. Something we see a lot and something actually we've seen quite a bit so far this early season. Seen a very active period. I think we were actually talking about this is, we see this active period in the Southwest Pacific tropics. A lot of times it really fuels the start of our Southern Hemisphere season. those extratropical cyclones are a great way to get us early season swell, and tend to be a lot stronger on the front end, at least, than model guidance. They generally get much stronger, much faster than the models would anticipate during that extratropical transition period. And, lo and behold, it is absolutely pumping today on the South Shore.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was, I think, certainly a forecast that we undercalled. It happens, like, especially with these, it was not something, I expected a nice swell for Hawaii. I didn't expect what we're seeing now. But like you see, when looking back on that storm, there's some great things and some things that I really didn't like that much about it. The things that I like, that extratropical transition, as you mentioned, generally speaking, when we see that, the models tend to underestimate the wind speeds within those storms. So, anywhere from 5 to 10 knots. The expansion of size really helped. But the thing that I really kind of threw me off in terms of the size we're seeing now is just the track that storm.
The track was atrocious. Down and away is it's not really a good thing. Sure, it's okay for a pitch in Major League Baseball, but for a storm track for kind of send and swell somewhere down and away is not a particularly good thing. And, for Southern California, we'll be dealing with shadowing from Tahiti. It's a very interesting one for the West Coast, though, because it's one of those really westerly swells. It'll actually be a better Southern Hemisphere swell for a lot of areas north of Point Conception, because that swell energy is going to be going over the top of Tahiti. Although, taking a look back through a couple of the charts and the ASCAP passes, it does look like it will be a decent bit of swell for Southern California. Based on what happened in Hawaii, it'll probably be a little bit better than model guidance, especially in that longer period stuff that's going to be coming from a atypical direction, which is 215 to 220 plus. Very westerly Southern Hemisphere swell. So it'll be not a run-of-the-mill Southern Hemisphere swell for us. We had a number of these swells last year. They're very western direction, but this one, it's a lot of times we're more south-southwest or south, and we're seeing storms develop on the other side of the Tahiti shadow and not seeing swells come over the top of Tahiti. So it kind of does interesting things for breaks around Southern California. You have areas that really need a lot more west in the swell, actually better than, say, a place like North Orange County. That's, generally speaking, one of the best places to be during Southern Hemisphere swell season. So interesting there. And then for places north of Point Conception, it's generally larger there than it will be in Southern California on these types of swells, which is also very inverse the norm.
Yeah, atypical. Yeah, so to backtrack just a little bit, I think there's to me, when I look at this, there's some really cool features for those that are getting into surf forecasting a little bit. Maybe a little bit newer to all of this and some of the terms we're using right now. So just when we say a particular swell is shadowed, generally what that means is there's some sort of landmass between where the storm is happening and your area of interest. And that can be, in this case, it's kind of a doubly so for Southern California. You've got Tahiti and French Polynesia, which this fetch for Southern California especially was partially blocked by Tahiti and French Polynesia. And that usually tends to strip, somewhere around 30 to 40% of the energy away. If in contrast to if those islands didn't exist. And then once you get to Southern California, you've got all the Channel Islands offshore too, which can take even a bigger chunk for certain places. You mentioned North Orange County, and once we start seeing swells above 205, 210 degrees, especially up around, from around Huntington Beach up through Seal Beach area, you're just getting almost shut out because you're just getting blocked by San Clemente Island and Catalina Island as well.
A double whammy. And those storm systems that are behind the Tahiti French Polynesia shadow, generally those swells are going to be significantly more inconsistent for us anyways. Yeah. And then you have the shadowing as well, because we'll still see a couple of waves in an area like North Orange County, but it's significantly slower than it would be on, say, a kind of a straight south swell for us.
Yeah, and the other like you'd mentioned this too, some spots that you wouldn't normally associate with being good on Southern Hemisphere swells actually tend to do pretty well. Like the South Bay is actually a good example of this. You look up, not that the surf necessarily gets great on Southern Hemisphere swells alone. In the South Bay, it just tends to be one big closeout. But you can see a decent bit of size from, say, Venice Beach down through the Manhattan area on swells in that 210, 215, 220 degree range.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I gotta groan. Yelling a bit here.
Axe, what's up, buddy?
Oh, gonna make Kevin do some work on the back end.
Special guest forecaster. That's all right. We'll leave him in there.
Oh, where were we? Yeah, so Southwest swells in the South Bay, places like South San Diego that often just get passed by on these steeper south swells that we see during the summer, do pretty well. The Central Coast up into Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz generally does pretty well on Southern Hemisphere swells, but these more westerly ones are really fun up there as well. So, yeah, kind of a cool thing. And then we have the exact opposite. We have a very steep south-southeast swell from a storm system in the eastern South Pacific the last few days. That actually looks like a pretty good swell for places like North Orange County. And the kind of the interesting thing there is when you have these westerly and then very easterly or straight south Southern Hemisphere swells, it could be peaky just off the Southern Hemisphere swells.
Yeah, it's a combo from Southern Hemisphere swells.
Yeah, not always the case, but a couple slingshots down the beach,
Yeah. I mean, let's see, that southeast is kind of like 170, 165 for and again, for those of you, I'll get into super surf jargon real quick or super meteorological jargon real quick. When we're referring to those numbers, 170, 165, that's directional degrees, meaning where the swell is coming from. Where 180 would be straight south, 270 would be straight west, 360 or 0 would be straight north, and 90 degrees swell would be from the straight east. So in this case, these swells, believe it or not, actually have a little bit of east in them and can get into Southern California. We've got an open swell window down to around about 160 degrees for kind of Southern California in general, and even that is pretty limited. It's like North Orange County, couple spots in San Diego, couple spots in North LA.
It's like you can actually go a little bit further to the east and sneak a couple waves into Santa Barbara too.
Yeah. It's kind of sneaks in on the inside of those Channel Islands. So anyway, this I think this upcoming southeast is about 165 to 170. The southwest is kind of 215ish or so. So we're right around 40 to 45 degrees off on them, and that's kind of a general rule of thumb that you can start to see some peaks and some combos, comboed up peaks, and then I think it'll help too that we should have a little bit of northwest swell lingering around as that swell hits Southern California as well.
Yeah, there will be a bit in there, and then got another nice looking storm system underway now in the central South Pacific, straight south swell that sets up for the first 2 days in April, and then long range, it looks like the end of the month could have a really nice run of storm activity in the central South Pacific. And, some of the stuff is pointing to a very active first week to 10 days of April. So, looking way long range into the Magic 8 Ball. And, it could be a decent run of Southern Hemisphere swell stretching well into April. So, hopefully by that time we're kind of maybe getting a little bit more back to business as usual, but something to look forward to anyways there.
Yeah. I haven't looked at, I've been busy with a couple other things. I haven't looked at the North Pacific charts. I guess it feels like days, but I guess it was just since Sunday that I had a really good look. And it did also look like the North Pacific could have a little pulse heading into early April as well. Are you still seeing that on the charts?
Yeah, it's been bouncing around a little bit. It looks like we could see the Gulf of Alaska and off the West Coast get a little bit busier as we move towards the end of the month. The next little bit, we're going to be in a very similar pattern to what we've been in recently, very active along the West Coast, large high pressure north of Hawaii. So longer period swells coming from really far away, not really doing a whole lot for most of the West Coast, and then shorter period northwest mix from storms just off of the West Coast. So it's definitely could see some changes long range, and that'll be something that we'll definitely want to keep an eye out. Although, generally speaking, this time of year, it's like shorter period northwest mix from storms along the coast as we move through April. And likely that looks like the case, though we could see a little bit of longer period northwest swell.
Oh, Axe. You want to jump on the pod?
Oh my goodness. The joys of working from home.
With kids at home. Oh man. All right. So, before we go and I'll let you get to Axe, I wanted to plug our next podcast, which is going to be next Pacific-based podcast, which will be next Tuesday, the 31st. And again, I don't think we're going to be talking surf specifics too much. If there's something kind of interesting that we'd like to hit on, with regards to just general ocean knowledge, we will certainly do that, kind of like we just did today. But we will have our senior forecaster and the longest tenured Surfline employee, Chris Borg, on. He's been with Surfline since the beginning, which has actually been it's 35 years this year that Surfline's been around, and that Chris has been around. And he's going to come on and give us kind of a history of Surfline. And it's one, if you are interested at all in this, you will not want to miss, because Chris is a classic dude, and just the way he tells stories is it's pretty incredible. So, like, all right, so Todd, do you have a favorite Chris Borg story that at least that you can tell on the podcast right now?
Oh man, I just anytime you go surfing between, I would say 7 and 9 in the morning, anywhere in Huntington State Beach or Huntington Beach, you always see Chris running because he runs like 10 miles a day. He's a machine. And then he's so funny. Like he doesn't always give you a whole lot, but then when he decides to jump in, it's just zingers. It's 3 words and it's just
mic drop.
gold. Yeah. And his recaps of the history of Surfline are pretty special.
Yeah, I'm really excited. There's one story that I'd love to tell about Chris, but it's probably a little inappropriate for the pod. But
does this have to do with the U.S. Open party?
Yeah, it was a Christmas party actually, but yeah, you know the one. But yeah, you're excited. He runs 10 miles a day. At one point, he was doing like 6 marathons a year or something like that. And he's an incredible rider. If he does a series on Surfline called Ocean Oddities. He also did a longtime series called Surfology, and we still kind of have that going. But that actually started way back when we were doing the wave facts. There was a section at the end where Chris would write and kind of figure out something to talk about. But he's a classic guy, super funny, great writer. I have high hopes for this pod, and I think there's probably a lot of interesting things you guys will find out about Surfline that number one, we've been around for 35 years, and all the things that we've seen over these last 35 years, or he's mostly seen. So hope you guys can join us for that. Schaller, in the meantime, stay well. Give my regards to Axe and Brasky and Erica, and we'll talk with you next week, man.
Sounds good. We'll talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Forerunners, the Surfline podcast, normally dedicated to helping you score waves, but things have changed up a little bit today. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Just hit that red button below or the Surfline logo in the bottom right, and let us know what you think in the comments below. If you have a question, we may try to answer back in a future podcast or a future article. So please do let us know if you've got any interesting thoughts or interesting questions. If you're not yet a premium member, click on that icon in the bottom left for a free 15-day trial of Surfline Premium, as we would love to earn your business. Be safe, be good to each other, and we'll talk again next week.